Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. Check this out. On this episode, what I want to talk about is colors. Colors. No, not the famous song by Ice-T. Um, but I want to talk about colors, more specifically, colorism. Now, if you're not familiar with it, get familiar. I will explain for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about. And I'm pretty sure there's a segment of you who don't know what I'm talking about, but just relax. I'll get to it. Um, I came to this uh topic because I was as you guys know, I'm a huge fan of the TV series Snowfall, right? So I was looking for something, and I did a podcast probably maybe 2 months ago on Snowfall, and I was looking for some clips or something on Twitter, and in the midst of looking for the clips on Twitter, I think I typed in Snowfall. Um, yeah, that's what it was. I typed in the hashtag Snowfall FX, and there was a young lady that had posted a tweet about Snowfall, and so I looked at her tweet, and but what happened was when I looked at her tweet wasn't the thing that got my attention. What got my attention was the tweet right beneath the tweet that I was looking for, and I'm going to read it to you. Um, and the young lady's name is Rasante. On Twitter, she is my name is Rasante. Um, and the tweet is from February 20th, 2023. And it says nobody, meaning that nobody would say this. And then under that, it says me. When was the last time I saw a chocolate baby? Like both parents are chocolate and produced a chocolate baby. Not a brown paper bag baby, like a Hershey's chocolate kiss baby. Are dark skinned families becoming extinct in America? Question mark, question mark, question mark. And so that tweet got me to thinking, and I immediately took a picture of it because I was like, you know what, that's an episode right there. Because it deals with colorism. And it's always interesting because I'm going to let the cat out of the bag really quick. If you're not black, you probably have never been privy to this conversation unless you've been around black people. And then sometimes, even if you're around black people, we don't really talk about this particular thing in mixed company. And we're going to do that this time because but this mixed company, because those of you who are listening, I can't assume that all of you are black. Or those of you who are watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. I'm going to assume that you're not all black. In case you did not know, I am black. I got to be honest, right? They may not know. I mean, if they don't have YouTube, they may not know that I'm black, but I'm black. And I'm dark skinned. Chocolate. Hershey's Kisses chocolate, she described. I like to call it sexy chocolate, but hey, it is what it is. Nonetheless, that tweet got me to thinking because, again, not only is it something that is not really talked about as much in our community as it probably should, but there's underlying themes that go along with it. Before I even get into that, I will get into the personal. Well, no, you know what? Let me get into the themes first. And so naturally, before I get into my personal account, let's talk about what colorism is. And I'm going to read to you the definition. It says here another type of discrimination that typically exists among people of the same race, Ethnicity is colorism. Colorism is the prejudice based on skin tone, usually marked with a preference for lighter skinned people. It roots from the belief of white supremacy and it can be traced back to slavery. Hmm. When the slave masters raped and impregnated black slaves, the offspring were treated better than the typical slaves because of their white ancestry. The daily toll of having colorism today is impeccable. Dark skinned people report higher experiences of microaggressions, and dark skinned black women self report worse health and what does it say? Worse health than light skinned women. So that little blurb there deals with colorism. Um, Now, again, if it's something that we don't talk about in mixed company, but I'm going to talk about it on this podcast. Yeah, that is the origination of colorism in slavery days, and I know that slavery's been in the news this year in particular because they don't want you to learn about history. But yeah, the history of slavery was yes, white slave masters impregnated, raped, um, their slaves, female slaves, and a lot of times did it, you know, in front of, or at least with the knowledge of, the black man, and he knew it, but there was nothing he could do about it. If that white slave master wanted your black wife, who was a slave, he could have her, and there was nothing that you could do about it. That's history. It's fact. It's not opinions. It's not anything that the state of Florida is trying to hide from you or anything like that. It is fact. So I said that to say this. What that did was that created wherein black people looked and was of a certain hue when we got here as slaves. We then became more of a spectrum because our blood and our race was mixed. I don't think I need to be a rocket scientist to tell you this for you to figure it out, but that's how we as black people look in different shades and hues. Now, if you look at white people, they're the same color, at least for the most part. I mean, you got, white people with red hair, you got people with blonde hair, you got brunettes, you got blondes, but they're all white. Black people, on the other hand, we are of the spectrum. I mean, you could be as light as light bright, or you can be as dark as midnight. It just depends. Um, but that's the history, and that's how we got to that point. And because of, as I mentioned in the context, because of white supremacy in slavery, uh, the darker skinned slaves were treated differently from the lighter skinned slaves. And then the lighter skinned slaves, many of them were able to live in the house, in the housing quarters, and not out in the fields, in the shacks where the dark skinned slaves were. And thus coining the term house Negroes. Um, but yeah, that's the history. So let's go a little bit further. Um, let's give you some examples, and these are all facts that I pulled up here before I started recording this podcast. Examples of colorism: telling black children to stay out of the sun because they'll get too black. Oh man, I heard that a lot in my life, especially growing up in South Carolina. Boy, you better get out of that sun, you're gonna be too black. As if there's something wrong with being black or blacker. Let me let y'all in on a little secret. I don't know if you notice or not, because many of you who are listening and watching may not know me personally. I absolutely love this skin, this hue that I am. I have loved this color probably since I was like 7 or 8. And so, like, it's just like my man Pa said in Me, Myself, and I, De La Soul. People think they diss my person by stating I'm darkly packed, meaning that you're thinking you're dissing me because you call me black. You could call me black. I'm black and I'm beautiful. And I've always, and my mom, credit to my mom. My mom always instilled in that in me. Um, so she always told me I was handsome, and she always told me I was a cute kid, and so forth and so on. And then when I went out in society, you know, everybody else recognized. um, but yeah, so it was that I heard that a lot, especially again growing up in the South. Like they tell you specifically, don't be outside too long, don't be in the sun too long, you'll get blacker. And I mean, here's the reality: we're black people, so we're only going to tan but so much. So I could spend all day outside in the sun. The reality is, I'm probably not going to get any darker than I am. If you're light skinned, yeah, you'll get darker, but you'll come back to your color. We as a people don't change colors. I don't know if y'all know that or not. Um, Other examples of colorism: refusing to cast darker skinned black people in important film and TV roles. We know that this happens. Favoring one child over the other because they have lighter skin. Unfortunately, that has and does and still happens in the black community. Refusing to date dark skinned people. Hold up. um, I have never said that, but I've heard it a lot. I've heard it more times than I want to admit. Black men say, I'm not dating no dark skinned woman. I mean, my thing is this: at the end of the day, you're black. At least that's what you should be. And so for you to say that you wouldn't date a dark skinned woman, that's saying that you wouldn't date a black woman. And I got issue with that. Now, to each his own. Everybody ain't everybody's cup of tea, but I never believed that theory or that mindset of saying that, you wouldn't date somebody that's dark skinned. Full disclosure, the chocolate brother that I am, chocolate boy wonder. Um, I'll be honest, prior to getting married, and I've only dated black women because I don't find white women attractive. Sorry, not sorry. And that's cool because they might not find me attractive, and that's their loss. But anyway, um, I've dated. If I can, if I could tell you, I've dated really every end of the spectrum, from red bone, like, and I laugh when I say the word red bone because I think about the TV show Everybody Hates Chris, and Mr. Omar would always say, "Man, there's nothing like a good red bone." um, but yeah, from red to, I mean, midnight tire black, dark skin, and I mean, and all of them, in my opinion, were beautiful. So it didn't matter, and so I didn't care, and I still don't care. I find the beauty in black women in all hues. Um, okay, other examples of colorism: uh, glorifying features like light skin, straight hair, or light eyes. Um, Saying things like, "She is pretty for a dark skinned girl," or "She is beautiful because she's light skinned." Stop right here. If I had $1 for every time that I heard that, I would be independently wealthy right now. Unfortunately, that's something that is constantly said and perpetuated in the black community. Other example: when lining up kids, putting the kids with the darkest skin in the back of the line. You using hashtags on social media like hashtag Team Light Skin. Um, so yeah, it's been ingrained. Those are just some examples of colorism. It's been ingrained in us, and again, it goes back to slavery, and reminds me of the Public Enemy line: the hater taught hate, meaning that the slave master taught his slaves to hate themselves, to separate themselves, because you could never get unity amongst slaves if you divided them. And probably the easiest way to divide them was to create a second class and make ones feel better than the other about themselves, about their living situations, about their overall life. And so that's how it came to be. Now, again, it trickled down, and it trickled down over the years. Um, and it trickled down, and it's something that has permeated throughout our community in different ways and different mediums. Um, and it hasn't been cool. And it's something that, again, it's the secret that really wasn't talked about a lot, but it was definitely something that was there. And I don't think that we as Black people could not acknowledge the fact that it's there. Case in point, I'll give you an example. As many of you know, or maybe you don't know, if you follow the podcast, you know that I am a proud alum of the great South Carolina State University. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see my helmet right here where I played college football at. Got my degree in marketing in 1996, right? I enrolled at South Carolina State University in Orangeburg, South Carolina in 1991, the fall of 1991. There was no criteria for me to get into South Carolina State. But at one point in time, there was. And what I mean by that is there was such a thing called the paper bag test. And schools like and for those of you who don't know, South Carolina State is a HBCU. It's a historically Black college and university. So South Carolina State and many other HBCUs implemented what they called the paper bag test. So when you submitted your paperwork, when you submitted your application, you had to submit a photo of yourself. And in that photo, as they were reviewing your application, you had to pass what they call the paper bag test. What that means is if your skin was darker than a paper bag, you would not be admitted to that college. Let me say that again. A historically Black college located in the Jim Crow South as probably late as the 1950s. And South Carolina State's been in existence since 1896. So we've been around for a long time, right? Educating Black people in the state of South Carolina, in the South in general. And we had a policy, an unwritten policy, but a policy nonetheless, much like many other HBCUs of its ilk. If you submitted a picture and your skin tone was darker than a brown paper bag, you would not be admitted. It didn't matter how great your grades were, didn't matter how cool you was, didn't matter how fine you was. You were not getting in that school. So if I had applied to South Carolina State in 1946 as opposed to 1991, my chocolate face, my coolness, my ability to play football, none of that would have gotten me into my beloved South Carolina State University. And so herein lies the problem. How is it that we can perpetuate the idea of we need to stress education when our own educational system is separating us and ostracizing us based on how we look? We're all Black people. In theory, we all should be accepted to the school. And again, this is, late 40s. This was from school's inception up until, like I said, maybe mid 40s. Um, and it's interesting because if you and I learned this my freshman year, if you look at pictures of students, because there are pictures all over the place. If you look at pictures from back then, I mean, everybody was light. All the dudes was light skinned. They had the hair wavy, fried, dyed, and laid to the side. I mean, like the ladies, they had nice hair, but they were all light skinned. And you know, like I said, probably around 1950 that changed. But up until that point, if you wanted to be educated, and because keep in mind that you couldn't go to the University of Alabama, you couldn't go to the University of Georgia, or University of South Carolina for that matter, or Notre Dame, or Yale, or wherever. So HBCUs were discriminating against their own people. That's crazy when you think about it. But again, the trickle down effect from white supremacy and how the slaves were treated, we treated ourselves even worse, and it's because of colorism. Now, the article also says how to heal from colorism. Couple of key things: acknowledge that colorism exists through individual, institutional, and cultural encounters, and that it occurs across races, because it does. It's not specific just to black people. I'm giving you the black perspective because I'm black. Educate yourself on the history of colorism, which is what I've done on this podcast thus far. Check in with yourself. How may you internalize and perpetuate colorism? Because sometimes we do and we don't even know it. Listen to people who open up about the colorism they have experienced. If you talk to enough black people, you will get stories, particularly if they are older. I have a friend, and I'm sure she's going to hear this episode. Shout out to T. We've talked about that. We go back. I mean, she used to blog back in the day, and we were blogging. And I remember her specifically. Her name was Pretty Black back then, and she talked specifically on her blog about instances of colorism and the things that she experienced being a dark skinned girl growing up in the 70s, in the 80s, excuse me, 80s and 90s. So yeah, it's if you talk to people, they will tell you their experiences. Have conversations with people. Share what you've learned about colorism and how it affects others. Parents, caregivers, have conversations about race, colorism from an early age, and continue, these conversations as the child grows. I think that's very important. And I'll talk about my kids in just a second. Increase the diversity of blackness in Hollywood. I think that's very important, because if you make Beyonce the model for what's beautiful as far as black women, well, every black woman doesn't look like Beyonce. Every black woman isn't, light skin, long hair, light eyes. Some women look like Lupita. I can't pronounce the last name. You know what I'm talking about. Lupita from Black Panther. She is beautiful. But we black women, black men, we come in all shape, sizes, and hues. But yeah, I think that's some of the things that we have to acknowledge. And that's how you heal from colorism. I mentioned earlier that I was going to talk about myself. And again, I have no problem disclosing this, but like it's interesting. And what the thing that caught my attention was, again, the tweet. But like, and I don't know if some of you know because you know me, but the rest of you don't know. Like my wife, I'm dark skinned, but my wife isn't. My wife is light skinned. Now, as many of you know, maybe you don't know, we actually met in college, right? When I met her, I didn't say, hey, that girl right there is going to be my wife. But, at the time of this recording, we're about to celebrate 23 years of marriage. We got 4 beautiful kids. And what's interesting is like we would have these conversations. And I remember like when we first started talking, we were friends, really good friends at first. And then we started dating. And I remember just, we just some random conversation. We were having breakfast one day at school. And, she mentioned the fact that, she'd only dated like dark skinned guys. And I was like, I looked at her like she was crazy. I was like, so what does that mean? And she was like, well, I'm always been attracted to dark skinned guys. And I was like, well, you're light skinned. I was like, so what does that mean? And because I kept asking her, like, because I seriously wanted to know, like, what does that mean? And I knew what it meant, but I wanted her to say it. And so I joked with her. I said, well, hey, you have a color complex. And she was like, well, I'm light skinned. She was like, you date. I was like, and I stopped her right there. I said, look, I've dated them all. um, and all colors. I mean, like all hues as far as black women are concerned. Because again, I wasn't raised that way. I was just raised to see black women. I didn't really differentiate between light and dark or anything like that. My mother's dark skinned, but my mother is a beautiful woman, and she just instilled in me like you need to be able to be with a black woman, and that's what she told me and my brother. And we both married black women. But no, I wasn't tripping on that. Like, and so her little joke for me was when we were dating in college, she used to call me her chocolate man. And so like, it was a running joke and it was an inside joke. And I'm not going to get into why she called me that. But anyway, long story short, um, so like fast forward, we date forever, get married in 2000, right? We have kids, we have Dion, our oldest. Um, and then like naturally, our kids color wise are closer to the brown paper bag. And they all are honestly, the four of them are. We have three sons: Dion, Cameron, Brandon, and our youngest child is our daughter Skylar. They're all like different hues. I mean, like Dion and Skylar, number one and number four, are probably the closest in hues. They're very brown. Cameron is probably a lighter shade of brown. Now Brandon is my twin. Honestly, if you see, if you see us together, if you see any pictures of a young 12 Kyle, he looks just like me. Same hue, same color, same hairstyle. I mean, like everything. And so when he was born, Sharice would call him her chocolate man. And so like she to this day she still calls him her chocolate man. I guess I ain't the chocolate man no more. I'm like the second chocolate in charge, I guess. Um but no, we as I mentioned, as far as like some of the things that I read in that article, but one of the things that we've talked about as a family uh is color and colorism more specifically. And we always have dinner at the table. We always eat dinner together. We don't eat every meal together. We don't eat breakfast all the time because everybody's we move in different directions. We don't all eat lunch at the same time, but we always eat dinner together. We always eat dinner 6:37, and we watch TV together. We watch Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune together. um, but anyway, long story short, we've had those conversations at dinner, and I think they're very important to have because uh, I never wanted them to have a color complex. I never wanted them to uh, experience or you know be involved in colorism. Uh, I wanted them to specifically, my sons, because they're of age to be dating at 24, 21, and soon to be Brandon soon to be 17. Um, I wanted them to see the beauty in black women in all hues. And for the most part, they've all dated like girls, black girls of different, light, dark, brown, whatever. Um, and my daughter, she's brown. She's, kind of that paper bag brown. And, so she's, I don't know. I mean, like some of the boys in her class might like light skin. And I mean, like, again, I don't want her to experience that level of colorism, but I think it's very important to have those kind of conversations because you want them to know what they're actually may face from their own people, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, that's like the running joke, like at the table, I'm like, yeah, your mom got a color complex. And and sometimes, like I remember earlier this summer, we were having a conversation at the table, we were eating dinner, and Cameron said something about a light skinned girl, and my wife just kind of looked at me and she was like, "Oh, don't say that around your dad." He gets upset, and I don't get upset. It's more of a joke, but I want them to understand like we can't do that. You have to see the beauty in a woman that's as same complexion as your mother, a woman the same complexion as your father, or lighter or darker. Um, you know, our preference is that they fall in love and get married with somebody black. I know that may not be the case, but again, that's my preference. I'm not going to disown them because they don't. But if you ask me what I prefer, that's what I prefer. Just like my mom told me, she was like, I mean, my mom told me, she told me and my younger brother Damon straight up, like, I don't want a white daughter-in-law. Not that we ever were, but I mean, like, she just, I mean, and you have to understand, like, as crazy as that might sound, she is somebody who grew up in the Jim Crow South. I mean, she grew up in segregation. So, no, she a proud black woman. So she would want her sons to have black women, and that's what we did. We married and had black kids. And there's nothing wrong if you're interracial dating, whatever. It wasn't going to be anything for me. But colorism is it's important, and I feel like that tweet really sent me down a path. It sent me down a way because again, I'm looking for snowfall tweets. I wasn't looking for this tweet, and this tweet actually became a podcast. But I wanted to come on here and educate you all, and spark some conversation. It's never going to be too heavy on this podcast, but feel free to give me any comments, criticisms. I may listen, I may not, but I think it's a dialogue that we need to have as a people. I think for so long we have uh, held ourselves back from colorism, and I think we have to make sure that we have these conversations so that one, we don't do it again, and two, we make sure that the next generation doesn't fall into the same traps that the previous generation fell into because of white supremacy. And that's going to do it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for checking out this episode of the 12 Kyle podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Remember, the podcast drops every Thursday at midnight from time to time. From time to time, we drop bonus episodes on Sundays at midnight. If you feel so inclined, hit us up on Cash App, $TWELVEKYLE. Again, that's going to do it for me. This has been an episode of the 12 Kyle podcast talking about colorism, colors. Again, that's going to do it for me. I'm your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5 G's. Chill.